Billionaire CEO secretly follows young black home cleaner. Discovered twin sons left him speechless. Welcome to Beyond Color Stories. I'm your storyteller, James. Wherever you're listening from, let me know in the comments. And before we dive in, I have one heartfelt request. YouTube doesn't always recommend stories like these, so if you're truly part of this family, search Beyond Color Stories directly and subscribe so you never miss a moment that speaks to your soul. What happens when a billionaire, haunted by loneliness, secretly follows a cleaner who once vanished from his world and finds not just a piece of his past, but twin sons who carry his eyes? This isn't just another love story. It's about pain, healing, and a woman who cleaned floors, yet left fingerprints on a billionaire's soul. Stay with me until the very end. Because the twist, you won't see it coming. Let's begin. The penthouse sat above the city like a crown, sleek, polished, and cold. Towering glass walls offered a breathtaking view of New York's glowing skyline, but inside the silence was deeper than any night outside. Not a whisper of music played, not a voice echoed through the stone corridors. Just the faint hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic swish of a mop sliding across marble floors. That sound, so soft and simple, was the only thing that moved in the vast loneliness of the room. Kenya Monroe, dressed in her navy blue cleaning uniform, her hair tucked beneath a plain cap, moved gracefully across the floor like she had done 1,000 times before. But tonight, she was not alone. Not really. From the glass-railed mezzanine above, a man watched her with a stillness that betrayed deep thought. Dominic Blackwell stood in the shadows, his sharp jaw lit faintly by the golden glow of a recessed ceiling light. He wasn't a man who usually noticed the janitorial staff. His world was built on boardrooms, mergers, private jets, and power plays. People like Kenya were invisible to men like him, or at least they were supposed to be. But something about tonight had slowed him down. Something about her. He had come home late again, restless as always, trying to outrun the ghosts of his past with spreadsheets and conference calls. It didn't work. It never did. His penthouse, a $32 million architectural wonder, was all white stone, chrome edges, and glass. All style, no soul. And as he leaned on the steel railing and watched her work, he realized she was the only living thing in that place that brought warmth. She moved differently than the others who had cleaned his place before. There was something rhythmic about her. She wasn't just mopping a floor, she was gliding. The lemon-scented polish reflected light under her every step, and the cloth she used moved in circles that felt like a quiet dance. She wasn't rushing or dragging her feet, even though it was nearly 2 a.m. Her hands worked with purpose, and her eyes, though focused downward, held a calm strength that made Dominic pause. She hadn't even looked up, and that somehow made him even more curious. He tilted his head, squinting, studying the soft lines of her profile. The cap covered most of her hair, but a few thick curls had escaped and hung around her cheek like the frame of a secret painting. She wiped the baseboards with such care, it seemed like she was cleaning not for a paycheck, but for peace. There was grace in her movements, elegance in her restraint. He noticed how the muscles in her arms flexed subtly with every motion. Not dramatic, just strong, controlled, like someone who had learned to carry burdens quietly. That stirred something in him, a strange flicker he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't lust. Dominic was no stranger to beauty. His life was full of women whose elegance came with designer bags and red carpet invitations. But this was different. This woman, this quiet, unknown cleaner, carried a beauty that had nothing to prove and everything to say. It unsettled him. It pulled at him. He stepped back into the shadow, adjusting the cuff of his silk shirt, but he didn't leave. He couldn't. Kenya moved from the living room into the open kitchen area, never noticing him. She bent to wipe down the counters, her sleeves sliding slightly to reveal warm brown skin dusted with light freckles. Her fingers moved carefully around the chrome espresso machine, cleaning it like she'd done it 100 times. Dominic's eyes trailed the lines of her arms, not out of desire, but fascination. There was something about her he couldn't quite name, and that bothered him. He had built his empire on instinct. He could smell fear in a negotiation, spot a lie in a pitch, and calculate the weakness in any man standing across from him. But this woman, this cleaner with quiet eyes and steady hands, she was unreadable, familiar. But why? He racked his mind, trying to place her. Had they met before? Maybe at a corporate event? No, he would have remembered. Maybe she worked at one of his other properties. Maybe. But something deeper tugged at him. Not a memory of place, but of feeling. She gave off a strange sense of déjà vu, like a dream he once had but forgot too soon. A whisper of a memory caught in fog. He shook his head as if to push the feeling away, but it stayed, clinging to his thoughts like a song stuck on repeat. Downstairs, Kenya continued her work. She checked her watch, sighed softly, and moved toward the floor-to-ceiling windows with her cleaning bottle and cloth in hand. As she began to wipe the glass, her reflection bounced faintly back at her in the city's neon glow. For the first time, Dominic saw her face fully, lit by the ambient lights of the skyline behind her. And he froze. There it was, that familiarity, that subtle ache in his chest, confirmed. Her nose, the shape of her lips, even the sadness in her eyes. It hit him like a punch to the ribs. He had seen that face before, years ago. One night, in a different city, in a different life. A hotel bar, a storm outside, her name. His heart thudded loudly in his chest, louder than he was comfortable with. Could it really be her? But no, it couldn't be. That night had ended with a goodbye that was never said. A memory he had forced into the back of his mind. A face he told himself to forget. She had left before dawn. No note, no name. Just a whisper of jasmine and lemon on the pillow beside him. He had never expected to see her again. And yet here she was, wiping his windows, cleaning his floors, and avoiding eye contact like he was a stranger. Did she recognize him? Or had she really forgotten? He wanted to call her name, but he didn't even know it. He wanted to walk down those stairs, stand in front of her, and ask everything. But he couldn't move. His feet were glued to the floor. His pride wrapped around his ankles like shackles. Billionaire CEOs didn't confront cleaners. And yet, every instinct in him begged him to speak, to know. As she finished the last pane of glass, she tucked the cloth back into her bag and stood for a moment, gazing out at the city. Her silhouette against the skyline looked like a painting, lonely and lovely. Dominic found himself leaning forward, as if trying to get closer to her without moving. She closed her eyes briefly, as if collecting herself. Then she walked away, quietly, gracefully, toward the service elevator. The door shut behind her with a soft ding, and Dominic stood in silence once more. But the silence was different now. It rang with the echo of her presence, a presence that refused to leave even after she had gone. The scent of lemons still hung in the air, but beneath it, something sweeter remained. Something like fate. Something like regret. He paced slowly back into his living room, stepping over the freshly cleaned tiles she had just polished. Every step felt like a trespass. He could still see the streaks of her mop, the gentle swirls she left behind. He almost didn't want to walk on them. For the first time in years, he felt like his home wasn't empty. For the first time in years, someone had left a mark that his millions couldn't wash away. He sat down on the edge of the leather couch and rubbed his hands together slowly, staring at the floor. Questions spun in his mind like a storm. Who was she? Why did she feel so familiar? And why did he suddenly feel afraid to find out? His phone buzzed, an alert from his assistant reminding him of a breakfast meeting with foreign investors the next morning. He ignored it. For the first time in his career, business wasn't the thing consuming him. It was a woman who walked through his world without knowing the tremor she left behind. Kenya Monroe had cleaned his penthouse, but unknowingly she had dusted off a part of his heart he thought was dead. And Dominic Blackwell, ruthless, untouchable, powerful, felt something he hadn't in years: longing. The following night arrived cloaked in the same hushed opulence that defined Dominic Blackwell's world. The penthouse lights remained dim. The city skyline shimmered beyond the glass like a distant constellation. And once again, the man who had conquered empires with mergers and bought silence with billions sat completely still, waiting. It was the first time in years he had chosen to stay home 2 nights in a row, and no one around him questioned it. His staff knew better than to ask why their boss suddenly wasn't taking late dinners or hosting midnight calls with European clients. But Dominic knew he wasn't there for business. He was waiting for her. The cleaning company never missed their rotation, and sure enough, just past midnight, the soft ding of the service elevator pierced the silence like a secret. Dominic's spine straightened. He didn't move, didn't even breathe, as the doors slid open and Kenya Monroe stepped into his world again. Same uniform, same cap, same quiet grace. But this time, Dominic felt the weight of expectation crash into his chest like a wave he wasn't ready to swim against. He had made a decision earlier that evening. He would speak to her. He would find a reason, any excuse, to draw her in, hear her voice again, confirm the truth that had haunted him all night long. He couldn't explain why the idea of her not remembering him unsettled him more than the idea that she might. Both possibilities were equally dangerous. If she remembered, it meant that night meant something to both of them. If she didn't, then maybe he had been carrying a ghost that didn't want to be found. She moved through the penthouse in that same effortless rhythm. No wasted motion, no idle curiosity, just work. Her presence, however, filled the space more than any chandelier or designer couch ever could. She didn't look up at first, just placed her supplies down in the same order as the night before, and began wiping the stainless steel counters of the gourmet kitchen. Dominic cleared his throat softly and shifted a paper on the dining table he hadn't touched in hours. He had arranged himself there with an open laptop and a few meaningless documents splayed out, as if to convince her, or maybe himself, that he belonged there. That he wasn't just a ghost haunting his own life, desperate to chase something that had already left him once. Minutes passed, long and heavy. Kenya made her way closer to the living room, her mop gliding in smooth, slow strokes. She reached down to clean the legs of a crystal coffee table, and when she rose, their eyes met. Just for a second, but it was enough. Dominic's entire world narrowed to that one moment. Her eyes, deep, wide, brown, like melted dark chocolate on a winter morning, met his with the kind of impact that cracked open something ancient inside him. They weren't just pretty. They weren't just soulful. They were familiar, devastatingly familiar. He remembered them dimly lit by the amber hue of a hotel room lamp, looking up at him with a hesitant kind of tenderness that had made him feel like more than a CEO. He remembered how they had once looked at him like he was a man, not a title, not a checkbook. And in that second he knew he was right. It was her. It was Kenya Monroe. The impact of recognition swept through his body with a speed that left him breathless. His jaw tightened. His fingers twitched around the pen he hadn't used. She didn't blink, didn't gasp, didn't drop her gaze like most women did when they realized they had locked eyes with one of the world's most powerful men. Instead, she stared, politely, distantly, and then looked away, like he was no one. Just another man in a rich apartment she had to clean before the hour was over. And that hurt more than he had ever expected. Had she truly forgotten him? Dominic leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table now, watching her carefully. His throat tightened. He wasn't sure if he wanted to shout or whisper. He wasn't sure if he should speak her name and risk everything, or let it go and pretend it hadn't happened. But silence clung to him like a second skin. He didn't speak. Instead, he studied her face. She looked older, but only slightly. Wiser, maybe. Her cheekbones seemed a bit sharper, her body more toned, her eyes more tired, but not broken. There was a quiet dignity in the way she moved, and an unmistakable wall she carried within her that hadn't been there all those years ago. She had changed, but so had he. The woman he remembered had laughed nervously when he'd spilled champagne on her dress, had called him Mr. Rainy Night after they'd shared an umbrella into the hotel. They hadn't exchanged last names, just first names and glances, and a night of unexpected fire. It was never meant to be permanent, but he had never forgotten her. Dominic finally found his voice, if only in his thoughts. Say something, he urged himself. Just ask her. Ask her if she remembers. But the words caught in his throat. He didn't know what he was afraid of. Maybe it was rejection. Maybe it was the confirmation that she had chosen to forget him. Or maybe it was guilt. Guilt that he had never looked for her. That he had walked away from that night thinking it was a beautiful memory meant to fade, while she had perhaps needed more. He didn't know what happened after that night. Had she cried? Had she waited for a call that never came? He couldn't answer those questions, but he could feel their weight now, like an anvil resting on his chest. Kenya moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows again, the same ones she had cleaned the night before. This time, as she reached up to wipe the glass, her sleeve pulled slightly back, revealing a faint scar on her inner arm. Dominic's eyes lingered there, not in judgment, in curiosity. What pain had she endured in the years since he had last seen her? Had life been kind? Had someone else come along and offered her more than just a night? A wave of unfamiliar emotion rolled over him, jealousy, protectiveness, regret. He didn't know. All he knew was that he had never cared this much about any woman he barely knew. And yet, there she was, etched in the corners of his mind like a secret melody he could never forget. She glanced at him again, just briefly. This time her expression flickered. He saw it, a subtle hesitation, a softness that wasn't there before. Did she recognize him after all? Or was it just a trick of the light? He stood. Her eyes followed his movement, guarded now, but not afraid. He took a slow step toward her, then stopped. Unsure, he began, but the word died on his tongue. She tilted her head slightly, waiting. Do I know you from somewhere? He finally asked, his voice low and steady. Kenya blinked. There was no shock on her face, no smile, no warmth, just calm professionalism. No, sir, she replied softly. I don't believe so. It was a lie. He felt it. Or maybe he just wanted it to be a lie. Her tone was smooth, but her eyes betrayed something else. A flicker, a falter, a flash of pain. She turned back to the glass, wiping again with a grace that now felt like armor. She had shut the door. Whatever window had opened between them during that shared gaze was now closed, sealed. Dominic nodded slowly and stepped back. He didn't press. He didn't insist. But inside he was spiraling. If she remembered him, why deny it? And if she didn't, how could he feel so shaken? He returned to his table and stared blankly at the documents in front of him. Numbers and charts meant nothing now. All he could see were her eyes, eyes that once looked up at him from a pillow in a New Orleans hotel room. Eyes that, for a single moment, had made him believe in something bigger than money, power, or legacy. And now those same eyes had looked at him like he was nobody. Dominic remained at the table even after she had left for the night, long after the soft ding of the elevator faded into silence. He sat there, staring out into the city, heart heavy with questions and a deep, gnawing ache. What had happened to her after that night? Why had fate brought her back here, to his world, in this way? And most importantly, why was she pretending he was just another man? He didn't know it yet, but that moment of silence between them would become the loudest thing in his life. The city didn't sleep, but Dominic Blackwell did. Not. His penthouse was silent, colder than usual, despite the fireplace crackling in the far corner. The soft hum of the air conditioning did nothing to cool the storm building inside him. Hours had passed since Kenya had walked out of his home again, eyes polite, words guarded, soul locked behind a wall he wasn't sure he had the right to touch. Yet still her presence hovered in every breath he took. He had stared at the door long after it had closed behind her. His thoughts were no longer sharp, precise, or corporate. They were tangled, disordered, human. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his living room, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the endless sprawl of lights stretching across Manhattan's body. His reflection stared back at him, hollow-eyed and still. He didn't recognize himself. Not tonight. Not after those eyes had looked at him and said, without words, "You don't know me anymore." But he did, or at least he used to. And now he had to know more. He needed to. Sleep was a distant hope, lost in the churn of questions he couldn't quiet. So he made a choice. One he wouldn't have dared years ago. One that would have seemed beneath a man like him. Once. But not now. He called his driver off duty, grabbed the keys to his Range Rover himself. No security, no schedule, no plan. Just instinct. It had been years since he drove himself anywhere, but his hands remembered the wheel, even if his mind was far from the road. He drove through downtown, following no logic except the urgency in his chest. He didn't even know if he'd be able to trace her path. He didn't care. If there was even a chance to find out more about the woman who haunted him, he would take it. He waited in the shadows near the company's cleaning facility, far from where anyone would expect a billionaire to be parked. The night was damp, sky-threatening rain. He saw her step out at exactly 2:08 a.m., bag over her shoulder, her jacket too thin for the weather. She moved quickly, like someone used to watching her own back, not expecting kindness from the world. Dominic pulled his hood over his head and waited a beat before following at a careful distance. His tires rolled slow and soundless on wet pavement. His heart beat louder than his engine. She boarded a city bus, Route 47, headed southeast. He tailed it quietly, keeping back just enough not to be noticed, eyes locked on her figure through the foggy glass. It began to rain, first a drizzle, then a steady curtain of water. Drops tapped against the windshield like impatient fingers. He could barely see now, but he didn't stop. She disembarked 25 minutes later near the edge of a run-down neighborhood far from the penthouses and polished towers he lived in. Her boots splashed through puddles. But she never slowed, even as the rain matted her hair to her shoulders and soaked through her clothes. She walked fast, half a mile at least, then turned down a narrow alley lined with broken street lamps and uneven sidewalks. Dominic's knuckles tightened around the wheel, his chest aching. He'd never been to this part of the city, never needed to. It was a world away from his, one made of flickering porch lights and sagging apartment buildings with rusted railings. His headlights dimmed as he parked across from a tiny, dim-lit complex. Kenya stepped inside the gate. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Thunder rumbled overhead. He watched. A light flickered on in a second-floor unit. And then, two little shadows burst from the doorway like joy set free. Dominic's entire body froze. Two boys, small, maybe 4, maybe 5, ran into Kenya's arms with squeals of happiness that sliced through the rain like music. They wore matching pajamas with cartoon prints. One held a toy airplane in his hand, the other clutched a tattered blue teddy bear. Their curls bounced as they moved, their golden skin glistened under the porch light, and their eyes, God, their eyes, they were his, brown, almond-shaped, flecked with the same gold specks he saw in the mirror every morning. They laughed the way he laughed when he was younger. They had his dimples, his cheekbones, even the same way of standing, defiant yet curious. Dominic's breath caught in his throat as his stomach twisted violently. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe properly. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his fingers went numb. His mind raced, trying to process what his eyes were screaming at him. These weren't just any children. They were his sons. Kenya held them close, kissing their foreheads, whispering something that made them smile and nod. One of them pointed toward the street, and for a terrible second Dominic thought she had spotted him. But she didn't look. She ushered them back inside gently, the way someone did when their entire world was waiting behind a door. She turned off the porch light. The building went dark again. Dominic sat there, unmoving, drenched in disbelief. It began to pour harder. The truth hit him with a force that shattered every defense he had ever built. He hadn't just lost a woman 5 years ago. He had lost everything. He had missed their first words, their first steps, their tears, their triumphs, their birthday candles. He hadn't known they existed. But now that he did, he felt as though something inside him had split apart. A deep crack running through the cold, composed image he'd built over decades, and all because of 2 tiny boys and the woman who raised them alone. He lowered his head, forehead resting against the steering wheel, rain tapping against the windshield like grief knocking at his chest. He felt rage, but not at her, at himself, at the systems he had built to keep people out. The guards, the gates, the walls. Had she tried to tell him? Had she come to him and been turned away? And if so, who had he become? He was a man who could move markets with a phone call, a man who could have anything he desired. Yet somehow he had let them, slip through his fingers, unknowingly, tragically. A flash of lightning illuminated the apartment complex again, and he caught one last glimpse of their silhouettes, 2 small heads on either side of her on a couch, curled against her sides. That image would be carved into his soul forever. Dominic leaned back in his seat, drenched in more than just rain. He was soaked in realization, in longing, in loss. He stayed there a long time until the rain began to slow and the city lights grew blurry with exhaustion. He didn't know what he would say. He didn't know how to approach her. But one thing was now terrifyingly clear. Those boys weren't strangers. They were his blood. And Kenya Monroe was the mother of his sons. He didn't drive home immediately. After the rain slowed and the streets cleared, Dominic Blackwell remained still behind the wheel of his Range Rover, facing the apartment where the lights had long since gone out, and the world he thought he understood had been rewritten by 2 small silhouettes and the haunting truth that echoed inside him like a siren in the night. He watched as a few window shades swayed in the breeze, as the stray dog across the street settled under a broken awning, as the city returned to its rhythm without realizing that something monumental had shifted inside one of its most powerful men. The truth was a quiet, brutal thing, and now that he knew it, it wouldn't let him rest. His sons were sleeping in that building. His sons. And he had never even known their names. Eventually, as the sky lightened to a murky pre-dawn gray, he turned the key in the ignition, his hands cold despite the heat now circulating through the car. He drove aimlessly at first, the city slipping past him in a blur, until instinct brought him back to his penthouse in the clouds. He entered his home in silence, the elevator humming softly behind him as the doors shut. The space felt different now, larger, emptier, lonelier. The marble floors gleamed, but they no longer impressed him. The artwork on the walls was meaningless. The wine collection, the rare furnishings, the curated perfection. None of it mattered. He went straight to his study, bypassing the bedroom he hadn't slept in for more than 2 hours at a time in years. He sat behind the massive desk where so many of his deals had been made, and for once he didn't open his laptop to check stocks or review contracts. He didn't reach for his gold-plated fountain pen or touch the leather notebook embossed with his initials. He picked up his phone and dialed a number very few people knew. "Lucas," he said when the voice on the other end answered groggily, "I need a full background check. On a woman named Kenya Monroe. Immediately. I'll text you the correct spelling and her work details. I want everything. Legal history, address history, family connections, children, especially children, birth certificates, medical records. Anything you can get without breaking a federal law, or even if you have to. You have 5 hours. Send it encrypted, and don't ask me why." He hung up without waiting for confirmation. Lucas had worked with Dominic for over a decade. He wouldn't question the order. By the time the sun had risen above the skyline, Dominic had stripped off his soaked shirt and changed into a black t-shirt and sweatpants. He brewed a pot of dark roast he wouldn't drink, pacing the penthouse like a caged thing. There was no relief, no distraction strong enough. The night had delivered more than a revelation. It had opened a wound he didn't know he'd carried. He tried to picture them again, the two boys who had run out of that apartment like twin sparks of light in the storm. How many birthdays had he missed? Had they ever seen the inside of a theme park? Did they go to daycare or school? Did they cry for him when they were babies and Kenya had to pretend their father was just not around? He couldn't shake the thought of her raising them alone, maybe struggling, maybe scared, while he sat in boardrooms wearing suits worth more than the rent she paid each month. He had been building empires while she had been building a life without him, and now he didn't know if he was allowed to walk into it. The email arrived just past 9. Lucas, as always, delivered with cold precision. The file was thick. Dominic downloaded it, each page opening with a soft click that made his pulse jump. He read every word, every line, slower than usual, letting it slice through him like paper cuts. Kenya Monroe, age 28, born in Houston, graduated high school with honors, moved to New Orleans at 21, employed by Crescent Moon Cleaning Services for the past 4 years. No criminal record. No medical red flags, no known legal disputes, no listed family outside a deceased grandmother. Twin boys, Elijah and Emery Monroe, born on the same day, March 12th, 5 years ago. No father listed on either birth certificate, no court claims, no child support, no paternity test, no mention of his name. Anywhere. It was as if he had never existed. Dominic blinked at the screen, his jaw clenching hard enough to ache. His name, Dominic Blackwell, was completely absent. The twins were legally born to a single mother. That was the phrase the hospital records used. Single mother. As if he had been a ghost all along. As if he hadn't been part of the night that created them. As if he had abandoned her. But had he? Or had she left first? He scrolled further. Kenya had given birth at St. Althea's General Hospital. She had been alone. No emergency contact, no visitors listed. She had spent 3 nights in recovery, then discharged herself. The report noted, mild postnatal fatigue, stable vitals, no complications. Dominic read the clinical language as if it were a confession. She had done it all herself, and she hadn't told a soul who the father was. His hands trembled. Rage was there, burning under the surface, but it wasn't aimed only at her. It turned inward, too, hot and unforgiving. How had he not known? Why hadn't he looked for her? Why had he assumed she was just a one-night echo in the past, not someone who carried his future into the world? Was it arrogance Was it fear, or just the blind certainty of a man who thought everything important would naturally come to him? He closed the file slowly and leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The shame that followed was like a quiet landslide, slow, heavy, unrelenting. He imagined the sound of tiny feet in his hallway, imagined little voices echoing off these high marble walls, imagined what it would have been like to teach them how to ride bikes, to kiss their foreheads, to buy them birthday cakes. But he hadn't. And now all those firsts belonged to someone else, or worse, had passed by unnoticed, uncelebrated because he hadn't been there. He stood again, restless. The penthouse felt like a lie, a monument to everything he thought he was, now overshadowed by the truth of what he had never been, a father. He remembered the way Kenya had looked at him, not with anger, not with hope, just distance. That haunted him more than anything else. If she had screamed at him, if she had cried, he would have known what to do. But she hadn't. She had looked right through him, like the part of her that once trusted him had died quietly, without ceremony. He opened the window to his balcony, letting in the sharp breeze. He needed air. He needed clarity. The city below moved on, unaware that one of its most untouchable men was now deeply, irreversibly touched. His sons were out there, and they had no idea who he was. He whispered their names to himself for the first time. Elijah, Emery. The syllables felt sacred, foreign and familiar all at once. His sons. But what now? Could he knock on her door and demand answers? Could he claim his place in lives that had never known him? Would they even want him? Would she? Did he deserve it? The guilt was sharp, but the ache in his chest was sharper. A part of him had awakened, a part that didn't care about boardrooms or profits or shareholder trust, a part that only cared about two little boys and the woman who had carried them through storms while he sat under golden chandeliers. He wasn't angry at her. Not truly, not anymore. He was ashamed, ashamed that she had faced the world alone while he slept in luxury, ashamed that she might have knocked on doors that never opened, ashamed that he had never once looked back. Until now, he had answers. But now came the harder part. What would he do with them? He had the answers, but answers weren't enough. Not for a man like Dominic Blackwell, who had built his entire life on action, control, and certainty. Now he had none of that. All he had was the quiet burn of shame in his chest and the sacred echo of two names, Elijah and Emery, beating through his pulse like a second heartbeat. He had never uttered the word father in connection to himself before, not once. But now the title hovered over him like a judgment and a prayer, and he couldn't breathe without hearing it whisper against the walls of his mind. He didn't sleep. He barely sat. He paced his penthouse like a lion in a cage, planning every move, every word, knowing there was no script for what came next. Only instinct, only heart, and heartbreak. He waited until the sun threatened to rise, painting the edge of the city with a tired gold, before he made the call. Quietly, discreetly. He didn't want boardroom gossip or staff whispers. Just action. His assistant, Mia, picked up on the first ring, always alert, always poised. "Reassign Ms. Monroe to suite 11B today," he said calmly, as if it were routine. "Have it cleaned first, thing in the morning, and clear the floor. I don't want any interruptions." Mia, always trained never to question a directive, simply responded, "Yes, Mr. Blackwell," before the line clicked off. He stared at the phone long after the call ended, his thumb brushing over the screen like it might burn him. This was it, the moment, the reckoning. Hours later, the suite was prepped, curtains opened to the skyline, fresh linen placed, but none of it mattered. Not to Dominic. He stood inside that room, his own private space that hadn't seen much use since his mother once stayed there for a week years ago, now breathing like it had a purpose. His chest was tight, nerves thrumming just beneath the surface of his composed exterior. He wore no suit, no tie, no signature black-on-black armor of corporate dominance. Just a plain gray sweater and dark slacks, sleeves rolled, as if he were trying not to look like the man she had every reason to hate. The door creaked softly. Footsteps. He turned, and there she was. Kenya Monroe, holding her cleaning kit like a shield, and stepping into the room with quiet precision, eyes scanning, unaware, until she saw him. She stopped. Her breath hitched. A pause, a flicker of disbelief, and then she straightened like someone ready to run. But he moved first. "Please don't," he said gently, stepping forward, not as a boss, not as a billionaire, but as a man who had learned the price of silence. "Don't go. Not yet. We need to talk." Her eyes hardened. "Mr. Blackwell, I was told—" "You weren't told the truth," he interrupted, his voice low, raw. "You weren't told why you're here, but you know, don't you?" She swallowed hard, the door still behind her, safety just a step away. "I don't know what you mean." He took another step closer, slowly, carefully, as if approaching something delicate. "They're mine, aren't they?" His voice cracked. "Just a little, just enough. Elijah, Emery, they're mine." Kenya's expression didn't change immediately. It held, then trembled. Her shoulders lowered as if the weight of 5 years had just been invited back in. She blinked, and her eyes filled suddenly and silently, like a storm building behind glass. "I tried," she whispered, her voice catching at the edge of emotion. "I tried to find you, but your world, it had no door for girls like me." He flinched. It was the most honest thing he'd heard in years. She set down her cleaning supplies, her hands shaking. "Do you know what it's like," she continued, eyes locked with his, "to sit outside a gate and be told you don't belong here? Do you know what it's like to write letters and get nothing back? To beg a receptionist to pass along a note and see her toss it like trash when she thought I wasn't looking?" Dominic's throat burned. He felt it, the guilt, the shame, the agony of all the versions of himself who had failed her. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear to you, Kenya, I didn't know." She shook her head slowly. "That's the worst part, Dominic. You didn't try to know. You never looked back. You just kept walking like that night never meant anything. Like I didn't exist." He reached for the edge of the table, steadying himself. "It meant everything. I thought it was over. You left. No note. No goodbye. I was scared." Her voice cracked, rising for the first time. "I had 2 lives growing inside me. No money. No family. I was terrified, Dominic. I waited in that hotel lobby for hours, hoping you'd come back. I waited until my cab fare ran out. And then I left because I thought maybe I dreamed it all. That maybe I was just another moment in a man's life who didn't want to remember me." His heart shattered all over again. "I never saw a letter. Never got a call. If I had—" He stepped closer. "If I had, Kenya, I swear. But you didn't." Her voice fell. "And I couldn't wait forever." Silence filled the room then. Not cold, not cruel, just quiet. The kind that only lives where pain has finally been named. Dominic moved again, one final step, now just feet away from her. "Let me see them," he said softly. "Not today, not now, but someday. Let me try to know them. Please." She wiped her face with the sleeve of her uniform, blinking away the evidence of years she had bottled up. "They ask about you sometimes," she admitted, voice hushed. "Not because they know your name, but because they see other kids with dads. And I tell them their father was someone the stars whispered to once, and that's enough for them. But it's not enough for me anymore." He nodded slowly, hands at his sides. Let me fix it." Kenya looked at him for a long time. The man who once vanished from her life. The man who now stood broken in front of her. Not commanding, not demanding, just asking. "I don't need your money," she said. "I know. I don't need a courtroom battle. You won't get one. I don't know if I can trust you. I'll earn it." She closed her eyes for a moment, breathed deep, then opened them again. "You can come tomorrow, after school. They like peanut butter and jelly, and dinosaurs." Dominic's chest cracked open. "Dinosaurs," he echoed softly. "They think T-Rexes are the coolest thing in the world," she said with a faint smile. "Then I'll bring one." She looked at him, a quiet laugh breaking through her tears. "You're ridiculous." "I'm desperate," he replied honestly. They stood in silence again, but this time it was different. Not broken, not distant. Just two people standing on the fragile edge of forgiveness. She picked up her cleaning kit again. "I have work to do." He nodded and stepped aside. She paused at the door. "Thank you for not yelling, for not accusing. Thank you," he said quietly, "for not slamming the door." And then she walked out. And this time he didn't watch her leave like a ghost. This time he knew she'd be back. He stood in front of her apartment the next evening, heart hammering like a boy on his first date, instead of a billionaire CEO used to commanding boardrooms and empires. The building wasn't much. Peeling paint, a rusted railing along the stairs, kids playing with chalk on the sidewalk. But tonight it felt like the center of the universe. Kenya opened the door slowly, wearing a soft gray sweater, her curls loose around her shoulders, and for a second she looked nothing like the woman who scrubbed his floors and everything like the girl he remembered from 5 years ago. Her eyes were guarded, but not unkind. She stepped aside without a word, letting him in. The small apartment smelled of something sweet, maybe cinnamon, maybe something baked, and the sound of a cartoon murmured from another room. His heart clenched. Toys lined the corner of the modest living room, and crayon drawings were pinned carefully to the wall above a tiny table with mismatched chairs. He stepped in like he was stepping into another life, one that had gone on without him. She gestured to the couch, and he sat, knees brushing together, unsure of what to say. The silence between them stretched long and wide like an old road no one had traveled in years. And then, softly, like something too heavy to carry any longer, she spoke. "I found out I was pregnant a week after I got back home," she began, her fingers curled in her lap. "I took the test in the bathroom of a gas station because I couldn't afford a clinic visit. I stared at it for an hour before I believed it." Dominic said nothing, but his entire body leaned forward, listening, absorbing. "I called your office the next day," she continued, eyes fixed on a spot on the wall. "Your receptionist said you were unavailable. I asked if I could leave a message. She said it would never reach you. I wrote letters after that. Mailed them every week for 3 months. I kept them simple. I told you I was pregnant. I didn't ask for anything. Just that you know." She paused, breath shaking but still composed. "I never got a reply. One day I went in person, stood outside your headquarters. I waited in the lobby from morning till evening. Your security guard asked me to leave. Said women like me show up all the time." Dominic's fists clenched, nails digging into his palms. "Women like you," he repeated, voice low, rough with disbelief and rage. "Like I was some groupie or gold digger," she said, looking at him now, face calm but tired. "But I wasn't there for money. I just didn't want to raise 2 boys in a world where they didn't know who they came from, where they thought their father didn't care." Her voice cracked on the word father, and Dominic felt it tear through his chest like a blade. "When nothing worked, I left New York. I went back to Louisiana. My aunt let me stay with her for a while. I got a part-time job, cleaning houses. Saved up. When the twins came, I named them myself. I picked strong names, names I thought they could grow into. I raised them the best I could. No frills, no big toys, but a lot of love. Her lips trembled just a little. I told them their father was someone who lived far away, someone powerful and busy, someone who might come find them one day if they wished hard enough. Dominic covered his face with both hands, trying to breathe through the ache building behind his ribs. Kenya, I didn't know, I swear to you. I didn't know if I had. She shook her head, cutting him off gently. I believe you now, but back then, all I had was silence, and silence feels like rejection after a while. She stood, walked to the tiny kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, her movements slow, heavy with memory. But I didn't raise them with hate. I didn't let your ghost be a curse in our house. I made sure they laughed. They love dinosaurs. They think Pluto is still a planet. They eat too much cereal and draw on the walls when I'm not looking. But they're kind. They say, please and thank you. And they pray every night. They're beautiful, Dominic. And they're mine. She looked at him then, full force, eyes no longer guarded but raw and shining. But they're yours, too. You missed a lot. First steps, first words, first time Emery sang in the grocery store so loudly the whole aisle clapped. First time Elijah fell and scraped his knee and said, "It's okay, I'm tough like Mama." I was there for all of it. Dominic stood slowly, afraid of breaking something in the air between them. I'll never get those moments back, he said, voice barely above a whisper. But I want to be there for the rest. I want to be there when Emery loses his first tooth, when Elijah learns to ride a bike, when they build science projects and hate math and fall in love. I want them to know me. Not as some stranger with a big name, but as their father. She didn't respond immediately, just stared at him like she was trying to see if this version of him was real. He stepped closer. I'm not asking for anything from you. Not forgiveness. Not a second chance, just a door. Just let me knock, and if they open it, I'll never walk away again. Her chin trembled and she turned away, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I didn't tell anyone, she whispered. Not even my friends. I didn't want the world to turn them into your scandal. They're more than your story, Dominic. They're my life. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder. They're my life now, too, if you'll let them be. She nodded once, barely, then turned to face him again. Her eyes were full, but not angry. Not anymore. Just tired, honest, real. They get home from school at 3:15. You can come then, but no suits, no bodyguards, just you. He managed a broken smile. No suits, just peanut, butter, and dinosaurs. She laughed then, quietly. They'll like you, but you better be ready. They ask a million questions a minute. Then I'll have a million answers, he said. And in that tiny kitchen, with the hum of the fridge and the weight of 5 years between them, something fragile and beautiful began to stitch itself together, thread by thread, word by word, breath by breath. They didn't hug, didn't cry, didn't make promises they weren't ready for, but they stood in the same space, sharing the same truth. And for the first time since that rainy night in New Orleans, they were no longer strangers, just two people bound by love they never planned and children they'd both fight the world for. Dominic didn't sleep that night, not because he was restless with anxiety or tormented by guilt like before, but because something new was unfolding inside him, something both terrifying and sacred. The knowledge that in less than 24 hours he might finally touch the lives he had unknowingly helped bring into this world. Kenya's words replayed over and over in his mind, not as accusations but as a roadmap, guiding him to a part of himself he never knew existed until now. He sat in silence long after leaving her apartment, parked on the side of the street under a blinking traffic light, watching the city move through its normal rhythm, while his own rhythm had changed completely. Gone was the cold businessman who measured time by profit margins and quarterly reports. In his place was a man measuring moments by the soft giggle of a child he hadn't yet heard, by the weight of a small hand in his, by the hope that maybe, just maybe, he could still be something more than his past failures. By the time morning came and the sun cast long shadows across the buildings, Dominic found himself walking through a toy store for the first time in years, completely lost but strangely excited, scanning shelves with wide, uncertain eyes, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder that now held two identical T-Rex toys, packs of colorful markers, a space-themed storybook, and two tiny sweatshirts with little lightning bolts across the chest. He didn't want to buy their love. He wanted to arrive with the language children understood. Fun, color, imagination. Kenya had told him not to arrive in a suit, and he honored her word like gospel, choosing instead a soft navy hoodie and jeans, blending in like any other tired man in a city full of them. But this time his exhaustion was laced with hope. At 3 p.m., he stood just across the street from the park Kenya had mentioned, the park where she took the boys after school when the weather allowed, and he scanned every face, every small pair of sneakers and swinging backpack until he saw her, Kenya, holding two tiny lunch boxes, walking slowly with her sons on either side of her, one talking animatedly with wild hand gestures, the other skipping, slightly as he pointed toward the playground. Dominic's heart thundered against his ribs, and he didn't move at first, didn't even breathe, because it was one thing to see them from a distance, in secret, cloaked by rain and shadows, and another entirely to be this close in daylight, with nothing between him and the truth. He was about to take a step forward when something remarkable happened. Elijah, the one on Kenya's right, paused mid-sentence, eyes catching Dominic's across the park, his tiny hand shielding his forehead from the sun. Then came the gasp. "Mommy!" he shouted, eyes wide with joy, not fear. "Look, it's the superhero man." Kenya blinked in confusion, following his line of sight, and her breath visibly caught when she realized what was happening. Before she could say anything, Elijah took off, running across the grass with Emery hot on his heels, laughter erupting from them like little fireworks in the cool air, arms flailing, tiny sneakers kicking up leaves as they ran full speed toward the man standing frozen in the middle of a sidewalk with a dinosaur plush poking out of his duffel bag. Dominic's instincts kicked in too late. He barely had time to drop the bag before he knelt, arms open, heart wide, and then impact. Two little bodies crashed into him with all the force of the universe, collapsing into one small, perfect moment, arms wrapping around his neck, tiny faces pressing into his sweater, giggles vibrating against his chest. And for the first time in his life, Dominic Blackwell wept. Not sobs, not theatrical tears, but a quiet, shaking flood that started somewhere in the deepest part of him and broke free as he held his sons for the very first time, the weight of them anchoring him to a world he never knew he needed. Elijah pulled back first, curiosity lighting up his eyes. "You smell like coffee and dinosaurs," he said matter-of-factly, and Emery added, "Are you the dinosaur guy Mommy said might come one day?" Dominic nodded, voice caught in his throat. Yeah, I think I am." Kenya had caught up by then, breathless, unsure, standing just feet away with her arms crossed, not in anger, but to hold herself together, watching as the man who once vanished into the storm now knelt in the sunshine with her sons, their laughter echoing like bells through the air. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't orchestrated it. But fate, in its strange mercy, had given them this moment, unfiltered, unforced. Dominic looked up at her, eyes brimming. "They're perfect," he choked out, running his fingers gently through Elijah's curls as Emery tugged at his sleeve to show him a leaf shaped like a heart. "You did this, Kenya. You did this all on your own." She blinked back tears, her throat tight. "I didn't want them to grow up resenting you. I just wanted them to grow up kind, happy, brave." Dominic smiled, the most honest smile he had in years. "You did that. And now, if you'll let me, I want to add to it. I want to be part of their brave." They stayed at the park until the sun dipped low, building towers out of sticks and leaves, sharing juice boxes and stories about dinosaurs and moon rockets. Dominic lying flat in the grass as the twins climbed over him like a jungle gym, giggling every time he made a roaring sound. Kenya watched from the bench, the tightness in her chest slowly loosening with every minute that passed. Because what she saw wasn't a CEO pretending to be a father, it was a man rediscovering joy, one dimpled laugh at a time. At one point, Elijah sat beside him, fingers sticky with melted chocolate, and asked, "Can we see you tomorrow, too?" Dominic looked at Kenya for permission, and when she gave the smallest nod, he replied, "Tomorrow and the next day, and the next day after that, if you'll have me." Emery added, "But you gotta bring more dinosaurs, and maybe jelly sandwiches." "The triangle kind," Dominic laughed. "Triangle sandwiches, I got it. What about dino-shaped cookies?" Both boys gasped in delight, clapping their hands like he had offered them treasure. As the evening cooled and the sky turned soft with lavender light, Kenya called the boys over gently, and they hugged Dominic one last time before running back to her side, waving all the way down the path. Dominic stood there long after they'd gone, the imprint of small hands still burning against his back, the sound of their laughter embedded in his soul. He felt something inside him shift. Not a change, but a return. A return to the man he could have been, should have been, and now had the chance to become. Kenya glanced back once, offering him a look. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to it. A beginning. And Dominic, for the first time in years, felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Not in a tower of glass and gold, not on magazine covers or Forbes lists, but here, on a park path, with leaves in his hair and love blooming in the spaces he'd once left empty. Dominic stood there on that dim park path long after Kenya and the boys had disappeared into the dusk, his eyes locked on the direction they had gone, heart still vibrating with the rhythm of two tiny arms flung around his neck, and the faint echo of dinosaur giggles trailing off in the wind, like music he'd never forget. And for the first time in his adult life, the silence he once dreaded didn't feel cold. It felt full, full of something soft and sacred and terrifyingly new, like love that had waited 5 years just to be called by its name. And as he walked back to his car, leaves crunching beneath his designer sneakers, now streaked with dirt and joy, Dominic realized that everything he had chased in life, every skyscraper he owned, every empire he built, paled in comparison to that hour beneath the trees with his sons climbing him like a jungle. Jim and Kenya, watching him with a guarded tenderness, she tried to hide behind folded arms and careful eyes. And over the next few days, then weeks, that fragile thread connecting him to their world began to weave into something stronger, something warmer, as Kenya slowly let him in. Not all at once, not with promises or declarations, but with quiet permissions, letting him walk the boys to school one morning, sending him a text when Emery scraped his knee, laughing softly when Elijah declared Dominic couldn't possibly be a real adult because he still said but and laughed at fart jokes. And Dominic, once the master of boardrooms and silent power plays, now found himself sitting cross-legged on rainbow rugs in their tiny living room, letting the twins draw stick figures and dragons on the sleeves of his cashmere sweaters with washable markers, turning his $1,000 clothes into treasures they would hold up proudly to Kenya when she returned from the kitchen, their voices filled with pure triumph. "Look, Mommy, Daddy let us make him a superhero." And Kenya, watching him from the doorway, her hands still smelling faintly of garlic and soap, would pause just long enough for a smile to threaten her lips before she caught herself and looked away. But Dominic saw it every time, that flicker of something more, something fragile and blooming, like a flower trying to push through years of hardened soil. And though neither of them spoke of what had passed between them that night in New Orleans, the night that had rewritten both their lives, they began to share new memories layered gently over the old, like the time Dominic surprised the boys with a trip to the zoo and spent 4 hours pretending to be a lost baby elephant while they guided him back to his herd, or the evening they built a pillow fort so massive it blocked half the hallway, and Kenya had to crawl through it just to reach the bathroom, muttering "ridiculous" under her breath while trying not to laugh as Dominic whispered, "The Queen has arrived," and offered her a crown made of cereal boxes and string. And somewhere between the midnight blanket fights and early morning waffles, something shifted. Something tender and unspoken that had been hiding in both of them began to emerge. And one Friday night, after story time had lulled the boys into warm, tangled sleep in the corner of Dominic's guest room turned jungle adventure camp, Kenya stayed a little longer than usual, sitting quietly at the edge of the couch, while Dominic cleaned up the crayons and folded their tiny jackets, the air between them thick with something unnameable, her eyes following him like they used to when laughter came easier and futures felt less fragile. And when he finally sat beside her, neither of them spoke for a long time, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything they wanted to say had weight and hearts. Even brave ones take time to expose their rawest wounds, until Dominic, without looking at her, said in a voice barely above a whisper, "You know, I spent so long hating the past, convincing myself it meant nothing, because it was easier than admitting how badly I wanted it to be real." And Kenya turned to him slowly, her fingers tightening slightly around the cushion, unsure whether to move away or closer, and he continued, "But it was real, Kenya, that night. You were the most real thing in my life, and losing you, it haunted me in ways I didn't even understand until I saw their eyes." And Kenya, whose strength had never cracked even during childbirth or nights spent stretching grocery money to feed two growing boys, felt her throat close because hearing him say the things she used to cry alone about shattered something she had worked hard to keep buried, and she didn't mean to speak, didn't mean to expose herself. But the words came anyway, quiet and shaking. "I tried to stop loving you. I really did. But it's like trying to forget your own name." And when their eyes met, it wasn't a reunion. It was a return, a homecoming of two souls that had never truly left each other, only been pushed apart by circumstance, by systems, by pride and fear and everything in between. And in that breath, that fragile space between confession and collision, Dominic reached out slowly, his fingers brushing against hers like a question he didn't dare ask out loud. And Kenya didn't pull away, didn't flinch, just let their skin meet like two puzzle pieces that had always belonged together. And electricity danced up both their arms. Their breathing synced, and the walls they had spent years building began to fall, brick by brick, until Dominic turned to her fully, voice shaking not from nerves, but from the overwhelming tenderness that filled every inch of him, and whispered, "I never stopped looking for you, even when I didn't know what I was looking for." And Kenya, her eyes wide and wet, whispered back, "I never stopped loving you, even when I thought I should." And then silence returned, not the kind that hurt, but the kind that heals, soft and thick like a lullaby, wrapping itself around two hearts that had waited too long to be heard, and slowly, as if time itself had been holding its breath for this very moment, their foreheads touched and no kiss was needed, no grand explosion of passion, just the quiet, profound truth of presence, of forgiveness unfolding slowly between two people who had been broken by time but not destroyed. And in that second, under the soft hum of the nightlight, with the twins snoring gently in the other room, and the world outside unaware of the miracle happening in a modest apartment where love had once been lost, Dominic and Kenya found each other again, not as memory, not as regret, but as hope, as choice, as the quiet beginning of something sacred, being rebuilt, one heartbeat at a time. The air between them had shifted, gently, profoundly, since that night their foreheads had touched in silent reconciliation, and though no words like love or forever had been spoken aloud, something deeper than language had begun to settle between them, like earth preparing itself for spring after a long, frozen season. And Dominic, for the first time since he was a boy, woke each morning not thinking of his inbox or international markets, but of school lunches and cartoon pajamas, and the memory of Kenya's hand barely brushing his across the couch cushion the night before. And as days turned into weeks, the transformation in him was unmistakable. Not loud or dramatic, but visible in the small, intentional ways he began to show up, in the way his secretary noticed he was rescheduling late board meetings to make room for personal engagements, or how his assistant Mia raised an eyebrow when he asked for dinosaur wrapping paper and peanut-free snack ideas. And while the corporate world of skyscrapers and luxury yachts buzzed around him as it always had, Dominic Blackwell now moved differently through it, no longer the cold executive driven only by numbers and expansion, but a man who had discovered that no amount of power meant anything if it couldn't win the right to tuck his sons into bed at night or earn a real smile from the woman who once thought she'd lost him to a world that never let her in. And it was during one of those nights, after dinner with the twins, after bath time, after Kenya had wiped cookie crumbs from Emery's cheek, and Dominic had wrestled Elijah into his pajamas with the clumsy love of a father still learning, that the idea took root not in his mind, but in his soul. She deserved more, not because she had carried his children, not because she had stayed strong when the world was unkind, but because she was simply her, Kenya Monroe, the woman who cleaned floors without ever losing her pride, who looked at him not with awe but with expectation, who demanded nothing but honesty, and gave more love than anyone had ever offered him. And so he decided, not as the CEO who could buy out companies and influence senators, but as the man who now lay awake wondering if she still dreamed of stars and whispered lullabies, that she deserved a crown, not of diamonds but of dignity, of love made visible, of choice. And he began planning not a spectacle, but a moment, something real, something sacred, something that felt like them. And he told no one at first, not even Mia, just quietly rearranged his weekend, canceled his flight to Singapore, and spent an entire Saturday helping the twins finger paint wooden frames for photos they had taken at the zoo. And when Sunday came, he dressed simply, no cufflinks, no watch. Just the sweater, Kenya once said, made him look almost normal. And he set the guest suite dining area with soft lights, ordered her favorite Thai food from a little place across town, laid rose petals not in a grand trail, but in small scattered hearts shaped by Emery's hands. And he waited, palms sweating, heart thundering, as the elevator dinged and she stepped in holding both boys, clearly tired from her second job, her hair loosely braided, skin glowing from the warmth of motherhood. And she blinked at the room, at the flowers, at the boys giggling and pointing to the surprise. And before she could speak, Dominic knelt, not as a performance but as surrender, holding a small box not with a diamond worth millions, but with a modest ring that had taken him weeks to choose, because none of them seemed worthy of her, and he looked up at her, not as her boss, not as a billionaire, but as a man with nothing left to give but his whole self. And he said, voice steady but soft, "I didn't come to rescue you, Kenya. I came to ask if I could walk beside you for real this time, as your partner, as your husband, as the man who wants to build everything with you." And the room went silent, even the twins watching with wide eyes. And Kenya stood frozen, lips parted, the weight of the world crashing down again. But this time not from fear of being abandoned, but from fear of being wanted for the wrong reasons. And her hands trembled as she reached up to her chest, her breath uneven, her eyes already wet before she whispered, "Why now? Why like this?" And Dominic answered, honest and unflinching, "Because I see you now, not just the mother of my sons, not just the girl I once kissed in a hotel room. I see you, the woman who survived, who stayed kind, who never stopped loving with her whole heart. And I don't want to build anything unless it starts with you." But instead of stepping forward, instead of saying yes, Kenya backed away, just one step. But it was enough to make his soul fracture, and she closed her eyes as a single tear rolled down her cheek and landed softly on the sleeve of her dress. And when she looked at him again, the pain in her gaze made his knees ache on the floor. "Don't love me because you feel guilty," she whispered, voice like wind through broken glass. "Don't propose because you missed 5 years. Don't crown me because I carried your blood. Love me only if it's me, just me." And with that she turned, gently guided the boys toward the door, leaving behind the food, the flowers, the fragile hope that had filled the room just minutes before. And Dominic, still kneeling, watched her go, not with anger, not with confusion, but with awe, because even in rejection, even in heartbreak, Kenya Monroe had shown him what strength looked like, and he didn't rise right away, didn't move to follow, because he knew now that love wasn't a sprint or a performance. It was a patient offering, a truth that had to be lived out over time, and if she needed more time to believe in him, then time he would give, not with pressure, but with presence. And so he sat back slowly, eyes on the doorway, chest hollow yet somehow full, knowing the only thing left to do now was prove her wrong. Not with words, not with rings, but with the day-to-day devotion of a man ready to become the man she deserved, even if she never said yes. He didn't chase after her when she walked away, didn't call or send flowers or press a single message through her phone, because Dominic Blackwell had finally understood that love was not a pursuit to conquer, but a ground to be worthy of. And Kenya Monroe was sacred ground, not because she bore his children, not because she had endured alone, but because she had the kind of soul that required a man to rise in order to stand beside her. And he wasn't finished rising yet, but he intended to, every day with quiet actions and steady presence. And it was only days later when life, swift and cruel, tested the very promise he had made in silence, because it came without warning like most tragedies do, subtle at first, with a call from the school nurse saying Elijah had a fever and was vomiting, and then another call just 2 hours later from daycare that Emery had collapsed mid-sentence, his small face flushed and his little lips trembling, and before Kenya could even grab her bag, she was holding both of them in the back seat of a borrowed car, racing to St. Grace's Hospital, tears blurring her vision as she whispered prayers she hadn't said in years. And when the receptionist asked for insurance, a deep voice behind her calmly handed over a black titanium card and said, "They're my sons." And Dominic didn't look at her for approval, didn't wait to be thanked. He simply moved beside her like he belonged there, because he did. And from that moment, he never left. He was there through the tests, through the IVs, through the sterile white walls and the long, aching nights that followed, sleeping on a narrow chair with his blazer as a blanket, rubbing her back when she cried quietly into her hands in the hospital bathroom, holding the boy's tiny fingers in his as they drifted into restless fevers. And when Kenya would doze off from sheer exhaustion, she'd awaken to find him by her side, his eyes puffy from lack of sleep, a coffee cup in one hand and their son's favorite dino plushies in the other. And something about that image cracked something wide open in her. not like glass, not like something that broke, but like a floodgate, something that had been sealed shut by years of hurt, and now was rushing forward, unstoppable, undeniable, because this man, this once untouchable, suit-clad, emotionally frozen man, was here, completely undone in the most beautiful way, and she no longer saw power when she looked at him, no longer saw control or wealth or reputation. She saw heart, raw and steady, and when the fevers finally broke and the doctors smiled and said the worst had passed, she found him asleep at the edge of the bed, hand in hand with Emery. Elijah curled up on his lap, and she didn't want to wake him because she knew what it cost him to finally sleep. And in that quiet space, watching the three of them together, she whispered to herself, "He's not the same man." And maybe he never had been. Maybe the version she feared only existed in her wounds, not in the truth of the man whose eyes had searched hers for permission, for redemption, for a second chance. And when he woke later that afternoon, blinking slowly as light poured into the room, Kenya was there, sitting by the window, holding a drawing Elijah had made of a stick-figure family with Mommy, Me, Brover, and Superdad scrawled across the top in green crayon. And she smiled without words and passed it to him, and Dominic held it like scripture, like something sacred. And she saw the tears rise in his eyes before he could blink them away. And then, just like that, he stood up, slowly, without fanfare, and went over to the boy's bed, his hand reaching for hers, and she let him take it, their fingers knotting together for the first time since everything had begun. And then, softly, so the moment wouldn't scare them, he cleared his throat and said, "Elijah, Emery, can I ask your mommy something special?" And both boys sat up groggily, nodding, one still holding on to the little T-Rex toy he'd carried through it all. And then Dominic knelt down beside their hospital bed, not in a room full of petals, not with champagne, not with violins or chandeliers, but in this space of pain and survival and fierce love. And he pulled out a ring box from his coat pocket. Not the same one as before, this one smaller, more meaningful, with a single stone carved into a crown-like setting that shimmered in the soft glow of the hospital lights, and Kenya's eyes widened, her breath catching as her hand flew to her chest, and he looked up at her, voice rough, raw, but steady as truth itself. "I'm not asking you to be part of my world anymore, Kenya Monroe," he said, looking not just at her but at the little eyes watching with wonder. "I'm begging you to let me be part of yours, from today until forever, if you'll have me." And silence fell, heavy and golden, and Kenya's lips trembled as she looked at her sons, who both whispered, "Say yes, Mommy." And she laughed, then cried, her whole body shaking with the weight of the years that had brought them here. And then she nodded, too overwhelmed for words. But the way she threw her arms around him, pulling him into their tiny circle, said everything the world needed to know. And the boys clapped and the nurses outside the door cried quietly, and Dominic held her tighter than he ever had, not because he had won, but because he had finally found home, not in marble, not in power, but in her arms, beside their children, exactly where he had always belonged. They didn't rush into the wedding because some things, when they're finally right, deserve to be celebrated with intention, not urgency. And so weeks turned into months filled with quiet planning, healing, and the blossoming of a life that felt both brand new and anciently destined. And by the time the day came, even the city itself seemed to lean in closer to watch a story that had begun with marble floors and unspoken glances now rise into something sacred and radiant. And it was atop one of Manhattan's most exclusive rooftop gardens, transformed that evening into a sky-bound garden of jasmine vines, flickering lanterns, and strings of gold light, that Kenya Monroe stepped forward in a gown unlike any other, not because it shimmered with jewels or came from a famous atelier, though it did, but because it was sewn with threads of dignity, grace, and the quiet resilience of a woman who had built a life with her bare hands and still offered those hands in love. And beside her walked Elijah and Emery, proud as princes, tossing white rose petals with the gleeful chaos only 5-year-old boys can create, both of them dressed in tiny suits that matched the man waiting for them at the altar, the man they now called Dad, without hesitation, without questions, because he had earned every letter of that word, not with wealth, but with devotion. And when Kenya reached him, their eyes locked not with nerves, but with something deeper, a mutual knowing that every scar, every silence, every broken piece had led to this moment, and the crowd stood breathless, staff who once passed her without greeting, executives who once assumed she was invisible, now unable to look away from the brilliance of her presence, as if only now realizing who she had always been. And when the officiant asked if Dominic Blackwell had vows, he didn't reach for a speech. He just looked at her, voice thick, heart bare, and said, "You didn't just clean my house. You lit it. You lit me. And I vow to spend every day of my life making sure you never again carry the weight alone." And Kenya, her hand trembling but her gaze steady, said through tears, "You were never cold. You were just frozen. And love ours thawed you." And when they kissed, the city below erupted in quiet applause from strangers who happened to look up at just the right moment, watching love bloom like firelight in the dark. And from that day forward, Kenya Monroe Blackwell was not just his wife. She was the beating heart of his empire, because Dominic did more than change her last name. He changed how the world saw her, making space in boardrooms and newspapers, not out of guilt, but reverence, introducing her not as my wife, but as the woman who taught me everything. And Kenya didn't stop working. No, she rose, becoming the founder and director of a powerful nonprofit for single mothers, women like her, who had once stood at the edges of the world hoping someone would open a door. And now she built those doors wide and tall, doors no guard could block, while Dominic became the man she had seen in him even when he didn't believe it himself. Showing up at school plays with a bouquet bigger than the twins, reading bedtime stories with voices and silly faces, learning how to braid curly hair with clumsy patience and love. And there were no more empty penthouse halls, no more echoing loneliness between marble walls, because now his world was full of laughter, art projects taped to billion-dollar glass, twin footsteps racing to greet him, and Kenya's humming in the kitchen at midnight. And once when a reporter asked him how it felt to go from ruthless CEO to bedtime dad, Dominic smiled, pulled a crayon drawing from his wallet, and said, "I used to collect empires. Now I collect memories." And those who had known him before, the ones who feared him, envied him, never truly liked him, now respected him for reasons they hadn't expected, for softness, for growth, for loving a woman not just in private, but proudly, endlessly, every day. And on the first anniversary of their wedding, he closed his company for a day and invited every staff member, from janitors to directors, to a celebration in the very rooftop, where their love became law. And he handed Kenya the microphone, and she said to the crowd, "Don't you dare think you are unseen. I was once the girl with a mop and a dream, and now I build thrones." And from the front row, their sons clapped wildly, one of them yelling, "Mommy's a queen." And Dominic whispered to himself, "She always was." And in the years to come, their love story would be whispered in offices, in elevator rides, in broken hearts looking for hope, not just as romance, but as restoration, as proof that sometimes the janitor becomes the jewel, that the cleaner can become the queen, that cold men can melt, and that the floors you mop one day may lead to the throne you sit on the next. Because love, real love, doesn't care about status or pasts, only presence, only truth, only the way two souls recognize each other, even when the world tries to keep them apart, and in that recognition, build something unshakable, unstoppable, and infinite. And so Kenya and Dominic Blackwell lived not in castles, but in warmth, in family, in the hum of bedtime stories and whispered "I love yous," in the resilience of a woman who refused to give up, and the redemption of a man who finally understood what it meant to give everything. And in the golden light of their days, it was never her uniform he remembered, never her job title, but the fingerprints she left on his soul, permanent, precious, and perfect.